Squadron. Thanks for coming out. This video is going to be the G80 locker swap in the 240. So if you're doing the G80 swap, you're going to need to pop your axles out a little bit, and depending on what year and what model, you might have to cut one of your axle shafts down a little bit with a grinder. To get the axles out, you got to take the emergency brake shoes off, which mine are pretty much non-existent, and then there's 4 bolts inside of here that you go through this hole in the hub, and 4 bolts on this plate, and then you'll be able to pull the axle out. Let me see if it just pulls out. So there's the plate, and the bearing is behind it. Use this like that. Not really. I'll destroy that. So there it comes. Once you have both axles removed, set them aside and mark them for the driver's and passenger side so you know which is which, and then you can come in here and remove this differential. There's 4 bolts that hold this carrier in, and you gotta mark these caps too if you're gonna reuse them. Mark everything left and right, and then this thing is kind of hard to get out. You just like use a pry bar and wiggle it out here. Keep all these bearing races separated for the left and right. So there's the differential. Alright, so this will probably be the hardest part of your G80 swap if you're doing it on a 240. And it's passenger side axle. If you try to just put it in, I got the differential installed in there. If you try to just put the passenger side axle in, you're gonna feel it hit metal inside the differential, and you'll be sticking out by about 1/4 inch. So I'm gonna use some kind of sloppy mechanic type tool to measure that, and then I'm gonna cut off of the end of this axle. I don't want to get my hands all greasy, but we're going to cut off the spline end that much so that it'll fit in there all the way. So I got the axle cut down last night, and I got it fitting in here so that this plate goes back tight to the brake dust shield and it bolts down all the way. So I got the axle cut down the length, and the seal sits pretty flush in there. And then I'll pull it out here and show you how I cut it. Alright, so I just used an angle grinder, and it was not an easy cut. This is pretty hard metal. Don't even try to saw it off or anything like that. Here's the piece I have left over, and I'll include some pictures. It was about 35 millimeters of spline that you should have left after you cut it. And I just used a regular thin wafer wheel on my grinder, and then I took it over to the bench grinder right there, and I just put this little bevel back on the end of it like it was before, and that helps you get it into the differential when you're sliding it in. So get this thing cut to the right length. Now I'm going to pull the locker back out of the rear end. I just have it in there temporary, and we're going to do the speed ring modification. Alright, so here I have the locking differential next to the open differential, and we're looking at the two speed sensor rings. And depending on what year 240 you're doing this to, you might not be dealing with this. Some of the 240s have a mechanical speedometer that I think is in the transmission, but this applies to the newer 240 with the electronic speedometer. So if your differential cover looks like this and it has a sensor on the back, then that means you have the electronic speedometer and you have the speed rings. So the locking differential has a bunch of different teeth than this one. It's not going to work out with my speedometer, and I've read about people just cutting this one with a Dremel online, and they're saying that it worked. But I also bought this speed ring strip from Capel Henke. This is where I got the panhard arm and all those torque rods back there too. So this strip is meant to be welded onto the differential, and it has the exact spacing of the 12-tooth speed ring that came out of my car. This one here, if I was going to cut this, I was going to try to cut this and just save this, but holding it up on there, the teeth don't exactly match the same spacing as this 48-tooth ring. And I guess what the guys are doing is cutting 2 notches out and then leave one, and then cut 2 notches out and leave one, and that would give you a pretty similar pattern to this speed ring. So I don't know, I don't want to get this thing all dirty and run a grinder on it. So I think what I'm going to do is just pop it off and weld this thing on there, try to, and see where that takes us. Alright, so I got my Capel Henke speed ring on here, clamped on with this dusty ass clamp that I finally found. It was lost, but if you could see the little gap in between there, I got it pretty much touching closed up, and up underneath here it's closed up pretty good too. So I got the clamp on there. I'm ready to weld. I'm not going to weld anywhere in here because I don't want to confuse the sensor. I'm going to do my welding like down in here, and I'm going to, once I get it like tacked on, I'll take this clamp off and I'm going to weld this seam and gently grind that down, because that's a tooth right there. That's the number 12 tooth, and it's like a half a tooth on that side, half tooth on that side. So I don't have a TIG welder, it's just a little amateur process here. I'm going to do some little tacks, put it on low, and see what we come up with. So yesterday, after welding on this speed ring here, I realized I made a pretty big mistake by not having the ring gear on first. The ring gear has such a precise fit around this interior diameter that the speed ring, even if I had my welds ground down perfectly, the speed ring was not going to let the ring gear go over top. So I had to cut the speed ring back off and chisel all my little welds and bust the speed ring back off there. It wasn't too bad because my welds kind of sucked. And now I got the ring gear bolted in, and I got some Loctite in there, because if these bolts back here would happen to back out, your differential is pretty much gonna fucking be destroyed. So there used to be a scatter shield that would keep these from coming out, so cut that off with tin snips because we don't have a bearing puller, and Loctite these bad boys in. And don't forget, put your speed ring on before the ring gear.
Alright, I got my Harbor Freight dial indicator set up here on the magnetic base, and the specs call for between 5 and 7 thousandths backlash, and I'm getting about 3 or 4 thousandths right here, so that's pretty nice.
Alright, so I checked the runout is within spec on the feeler gauge. Now I'm going to paint it with some gear marking compound and check the gear pattern, make sure that doesn't look too fucked up. I got this shit locally. Usually I see the yellow stuff. This is blue, so we'll see how it works out. I don't know why you just can't use paint, but get some of this jism on there. Paint some gear teeth. And then we'll paint the gear teeth, and then we're gonna spin the pinion around. I'm gonna grab this drive shaft and turn it with my hand. We'll check how the pinion gear is coming into contact with these ring gear teeth. I'm gonna paint these like this. Get like a nice even coating on there so that you can see how the gears meshing with the teeth. You want to get it on both sides, the top and the bottom of the ring gear here. And I'm not going to go into too much detail about what that should look like. I'll show you the pattern when I'm done. but you can look up online all the different characteristics of how your pinion's fucked up if the pattern looks fucked up. So I'm going to paint a couple of these and then we'll give it a rotation and see what that looks like. Yeah, so this is what it looks like once you run it through the pinion. My pattern looks like it's pretty even. You just want to look for anything that's real high or real low on that tooth. So that looks pretty nice. And what you also want to do is check it in more than one spot. So I painted it in 3 places and it looks good in all 3 of the places I painted it. I'm kind of having trouble holding the camera and doing all this, but I'm not going to rotate it. The markings there look pretty good, so we're going to clean that off and put the diff cover on, clean that up, and then we're going to check the speed sensor clearance to this ring and make sure that we don't need to move that speed sensor in and out. So we'll go over how to do that next. Alright guys, part of the G80 swap that I'm doing here is going to be some suspension hardware. And this is the Kapelhanke V3 panhard rod for being able to adjust the rear end whenever you lower the car, and you'll get a little bit of left to right axle kind of shimmy in there, and this will be able to help you center your axle. So right now I'm just setting up everything identical to stock length, and then I'll go into the car and adjust it as I need to. And I just want to give you guys a quick tip if you're going to get one of these panhard rods. IPD sells them too in polyurethane bushing. This is just solid steel pivot balls. As far as I know, this is like a better product, but I'm not really sure. I know the IPD has polyurethane bushings, and I don't really want those because I think they can fail a little bit more quickly than rubber. So I'm either going to go with something that's going to be steel or OEM rubber on most of my mounts. And the tip I'm going to give you for setting this thing up, and I'm pretty sure IPD's isn't the same as this, is you can install this and adjust it without having to remove it again. And he gives you these double adjustable nuts here on the end. This one here is only single adjustable, so you have to roughly set it up for length before you put it on the car. And I got these 2 eyelets basically lined up with the stock one and adjusted this one where I want it to be, and it's pretty much going to stay there. And I adjusted this one pretty close too. But what you can do is once you have this bolted on the car, this middle nut here is like a left-hand thread, and so is this. So you'll back this off a little bit, and you'll be able to spin this nut out of this casing, and then this one's also threaded into it, and you'll back that down. Another jam nut on there. So it looks a little complicated, but it's a neat little trick so that you can adjust this panhard bar right here with this one without having to take it off the car. So I got it roughly set up where I like it, and I'm going to go clean up some of the mounts under the car and get some of the rust out of these contacting surfaces. Make sure there's no noises going to happen, and then I'll get this thing installed. And we got some torque rods by Kapelhanke too that I'll show you real quick. I already probably made some video on this, but we're going to adjust these to the stock length and also install them. So these will be what's next, and this will help correct the rear axle roll whenever you lower it, and you'll get drive shaft vibration. So moving on to the adjustable torque rods made by the same guy, Kapelhanke. I just set it up so that this is the identical length to my stock torque rod, and then I took these 2 and made sure that they were with one of the bolts going through those bushings like that. Just made sure that they were both the exact same length, so I didn't have one or couple millimeters off than the other. So now I got these set to the length of that, and they're ready to install in the car. And as I was backing these nuts out and pushing them in and stuff, I made sure and put a bunch of anti-seize on there. I live in PA here where we get a bunch of salt and rust, and I know that I'll never be able to move those nuts again if I don't paint them up good with anti-seize. So I got some on there, and looked like he probably put some whenever he shipped it, but I just gave it another coating. And I'm going to install them in the car, and then put my diff cover on and fill it up with fluid and check the gap on the speed ring and be moving on with this job. Okay, squadron, I'm just about done with my G80 swap and my adjustable rear suspension stuff here from Kapelhanke.
I got this panhard bar adjusted so that my rear axle is pretty much centered, and you do have to remove it on one end to adjust it. So this big nut here, you just pretty much get close and tighten that down, and then the little nuts here on this side are the ones that you're going to do your adjustment on. And I found that pretty much I have the bar almost all the way shrunk up to its smallest size, and that centers my axle pretty good in here. I would guess that most 240s are going to have the same problem if you're doing a 2-inch lowering spring, which is what these are from IPD. So we got the rear axle back to center where we wanted it, and then I did the adjustable torque rods up here, kind of hard to see, in black, aluminum up there, and those are used to correct the angle of the differential here. And you want to bring that flange down so it's square, because when you lower your car, it's going to be pointing up at a small angle, and it's going to give you some noise and vibration. So you'll use these adjustable end links here. These end links up here, and you're going to want to just shrink them up about a half a moon distance in that bolt hole. Like, lay this bar out to a stock length bar, and then put it up in here and shrink this end down so that you see about a half a moon in that bolt hole there. And get a better shot up there. Yeah, about half of that bolt hole you want to go back towards the transmission and roll the axle forward, and that'll square up this flange.